So the national anthem there just ended as the President of the Republic, Nana Akufo-Addo, takes his seat here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogues happening at Peduase in the Eastern region. The President just arrived and has graced the occasion, and the event is under the theme After From Ambition to Action, Delivering Prosperity Through Continental Trade. And the President just arrived, and earlier we had the Finance Minister speaking on financing intra-African trade. And also now the next phase of the conversation focuses on putting business at the heart of the implementation of the AfFCTA, addressing blockages and incentivizing action. The moderator, Joy, has taken her seat, and we expect to have joined her lead business contributors, Ronnie Ntuli, chairman of Tiolo DBPY, and Sir David Ajayi, founder and principal of Ajayi Associates, speaking on addressing infrastructure, food and energy deficits. Also, Dr. Humphrey Eyim Dake, the president of the Ghana Association of Industries, AGI, will be speaking on facilitating free movement of people across borders. And also Dr. Catherine Chinedum Anyagolo Koye, who is the regional director for West Africa. The Ford Foundation will be speaking on guaranteeing security to deepening intra-African trade. All this is part of the main topic for the event, which is After From Ambition to Action and Delivering Prosperity Through Continental Trade, here at the Peduase Lodge, under the auspices of the Presidency of the Republic of Ghana, the AfFCTA Secretariat, and pioneered by the Africa Prosperity Network. And this is the grand finale of the three-day event, which has been happening since the 26th till today, the 28th of January. Now, the panel, the host for this section of the event, has mounted a stage, and we are now going to cross over and take this part of the conversation. Stay with us.
And so, Ronnie, I'm going to invite you in 5 minutes, 5 only, to tell us how do we address this. Okay, I'll go through the question again. So, Ronnie, we're talking about addressing infrastructure, food and energy deficits. We know the terrain, we know the challenge. How do we address it to create prosperity? Please give us your views in 5 minutes.
Excellency President Nana Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana, Excellency former President of Niger, Excellency Wamkelemene, Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, Honorable Ministers, business leaders, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a genuine honor for me to be at the inaugural Africa Prosperity Dialogue. And the reason it is an honor is that Africa now talks about prosperity. I'm so happy that we're over the discussion of poverty alleviation. I think that our people deserve a lot more than poverty alleviation. Our people deserve sustainable livelihoods. Our people deserve prosperity. And as we say, every generation has a calling. The calling for this generation is to deliver sustainable livelihoods to the average African. Africa Prosperity Dialogue, from ambition to action, delivering prosperity through continental trade. I would really urge, and I'll express why I would like to urge this. I really would like to urge that we say investment as well. Why do I say investment? I say investment because if our continent talks only about trade without productive capacity, we'll be net importers. I don't think that's a viable destiny that we should wish for our continent. Today's Africa continues to be a net exporter of raw materials in the form of agricultural produce and in the form of minerals without industrial processing. We've had this discussion many a time. We have to plant industrial capacity on the continent. We have to produce. As somebody said, we can't continue to consume what we don't produce and produce what we don't consume. A couple of words stick out for me in the title of this conference. Firstly, action. Secondly, delivery, trade, obviously, and investment. The question, if we agree about creating productive capacity on the continent, that we have to ask ourselves how do we do this? The first is the need to, as the point as I've made, the need to create productive capacity in order to enable trade. Emphatically, trade out of the continent, but I think with the creation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, trade, intra-Africa trade, as an important imperative. We need to institutionalize these interventions. And I think we've made some progress in that Africa has already institutionalized African Development Bank. Quite importantly, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, institutions like the Africa Export-Import Bank, the Pan-Africa Payment and Settlement System, the big intervention that we achieved in the creation of AVAT during the era of COVID to enable us as a continent to procure vaccines rather than each country on its own. We do, though, need to do more. We need to do much, much more. We need to enable private sector enterprise that institutionalizes interventions that the continent needs. It is important, it's critically important. It's going to be very difficult for us to industrialize if you don't have what we call trade enabling infrastructure. That is backbone infrastructure to enable the movement of goods and people. I think the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines mentioned it earlier, ground transportation, air transportation, ocean transportation. Backbone infrastructure, though, as the topic I'm required to talk about, is more than just transportation. Energy, if we are to industrialize the continent, it's very hard to argue to primary extractive industry that you need to process on the continent when you don't have power to put up an aluminium smelter, as an example. So there's some real practical things that we have to do to enable primary processing, secondary processing. Energy is important. Communications in the modern era, critically important, and my dear brother Ralph spoke incredibly well about this. Transportation and logistics. We live in and also my dear brother, the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines talked about this. We have a large continent, huge landmass, many countries that are landlocked that need access to ports. Our proposition as a company is that railways is the solution for mobility of goods and people on the continent, not only intra-country, but on a regional basis. So transportation infrastructure becomes critically important.
Yes, Ronnie, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
Perfect. Let me end it there. It's okay. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. I've picked up investment, productive capacity, institutional strengthening. As I move on to you, Sir David Ajayi, I'd like to invite Dr. Humphrey Ayim Darke, President of Ghana Association of Industries, to join the panel, as well as Dr. Catherine Chinedum Aniagolu to join the panel as well. David, your reflections on how we can build this infrastructure, how we can build this food and energy infrastructure to avoid the deficit. In 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, all protocols observed. I wanted to just say that, for me, the infrastructure of the continent is at an unprecedented opportunity, in that with things like the Africa Free Trade and this decentralizing of the idea of nation identities and the idea of a kind of much more regional economic environment, urbanism becomes incredibly important. We know that cities are where 50% of the population of the continent are going to migrate to. So discussions about how we build infrastructure and how we utilize the opportunity of infrastructure are going to be paramount. Do we use infrastructure the same way that the West has used it? Or do we use it as an opportunity to leverage the cultures and the opportunities of our environments to create the world that we want to create? As an architect who's returned back to the continent, in the last 5 years, I've become very deeply interested in how we build with the resources that we have, how we create resilience within the resources that we have that reflect our particular cultures and our particular sensibilities. I think we have a window, whilst this acceleration is happening with technology, to be able to think about smart cities in the way that are Africa-centric, thinking about hubs, thinking about resilience models on coastal cities that leverage new bucolic and thriving health benefits to our communities. These are all things that can be built into the way we make our infrastructures as we develop it. In a way, what I'm talking about is leapfrogging what I call blunt mistakes that were made in the 20th and 19th century by Western countries by making much, much smarter infrastructural investments that really leverage as much as possible for the exploding cities that we have on our continent. We know that we're going to be a continent of nearly 4 billion people by the end of this century. That means that our cities are going to be at capacity, and we have to build in the infrastructure that will allow for the growth, but also understand the way in which we want to work. We know that things like fiber, as has been discussed, is a network system that cannot just be rolled out in a sort of suburban sprawl. We have to think about new ways of density that make sense to the African continent, new ways of making connectivity that are smart, that can leverage hubs that start to create nucleuses that become attractive to investors and to the communities that are here. And I think these are just some of the things that we are, architects, I think, have the great opportunity to start thinking about, to move past just thinking about buildings, but to sort of plan with governments a way of seeing our cities. We are in a stage where we can't wait for policy and then implementation, but we have to kind of work as networks to really leverage the most out of the situation that I think is extremely exciting.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. I took Africa-centric, culturally relevant infrastructure, smart cities in an Afro sense. I'd like to invite Dr. Humphrey Ayim Darke, President of the Ghana Association of Industries, to please join the panel. And as we wait for Humphrey to come, I'm going to come to you, Dr. Catherine Chinedum. We speak a lot about intra-African trade. We also know there's a need to guarantee security to deepen intra-African trade. How do we go about it?
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies. All protocol observed. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation and also introducing an aspect to the conversation that often doesn't make it, which is security. We all want prosperity on the African continent, and we know that trade is a way to make that happen. But the continent is inundated with conflict, whether it is North, East, South, or West Africa. We are facing extremism, political instability, organized crime, and all of them have implications for trade. And it is important that we address this insecurity because everything we are talking about rests on that. If we don't have security, we are not going to be able to build infrastructure. On the contrary, we're actually losing the infrastructure that we have built. A lot of countries don't have the resources for the infrastructure they have built. A lot of that were built on borrowed money, and then in a split second, many of this infrastructure is actually then destroyed through conflict. So what can we do about it? I think the most important thing is to first of all recognize that security is integral to trade. Because many times when we have conversations and when we have meetings of security people talking about security, and then we have every other type of meeting. I think we need to start mainstreaming security into conversations, especially the ones that are around economic empowerment, around trade, around business, because it is so important. So I think the first thing, we need to recognize that security is important and integral to the conversations and to the prosperity that we want to see. Secondly, we need to recognize that, the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines mentioned that only a very small percentage of Africans actually fly, which means that majority of our movement is on land. Many of our land routes are now are no longer viable because of insecurity. And this makes our traders use longer routes, more expensive means of transporting their goods, and this makes their goods less competitive. And at the end of the day, what we have to do is not just increase trade, we have to make sure that our trade is competitive, and it is that competitiveness that will give us the cutting edge that we're looking for. And so we need to ensure that our routes, our trade routes, are protected. And so we also find that many times, even the measures we put in place to address insecurity and conflict sometimes are counterproductive to trade. So you begin to see that the security personnel that are put in place become extractive. They begin to, exploit the traders, and that makes goods more difficult to cross and makes it more difficult, for the traders to be competitive. So we need to address that. We need to make sure that we are building the capacity of our security agencies to understand that what they do has implications for the growth that we want to see, that they recognize that they need to be partners, and not obstacles to trade. We also need to begin to recognize the importance of communities, especially border communities, as being part of the solution to conflict. The border communities, to a large extent, are seen as hostile. Sometimes they're seen as the ones that are harboring, whether it is insurgents or extremists or whatever, and many times are alienated from the process of being partners in the solution. We need to change that, and we need to look at the border communities as places that understand and are the most affected by the conflict, and so need to be part of that solution. We also need to look at the private sector. Part of the reason that we have the insurgency that we have is because of high rates of unemployment, of poverty. I am not trying to say that poverty automatically results in conflict, but it is an enabler. And the private sector needs to begin to look at supporting some of those socioeconomic issues, that fuel conflict. And so looking at improving trade, looking at getting their goods and services from the continent. So they're looking, so before you look towards Europe or to Asia, look at how you can procure your goods and services first from Africa, and that will reduce the conflict, and create employment for young people. And finally, I think it's also important for us to look at, technology. I think that's been talked a lot. Because we know that we need to secure our borders. We know that we need to protect ourselves, from insurgency and all those types of incursions. But we need to do it in a way that does not hamper trade. And I think a lot of people here are experts and have spoken about how technology can be used effectively, to enhance trade. But it can also be used effectively to ensure that we secure our borders without necessarily, putting a strain on the traders and the movement of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Catherine. I think it's been quite quite an expose on the nexus between trade and security. Jemene, I'm coming to you to get your reflections on the conversation so far. But before I give you the floor, I'd like to invite Ogogo Akpata, Managing Partner Templars, Dr. Uzodimma Iweala to come as well, and Crystal Jackson, Chair of the Africa-America Institute, to join the panel as we'll be getting into your part of the conversation. Jemene, you've heard the story, you've heard the perspectives. We didn't talk about visas, we didn't talk about free movement, and that's a huge thing. What is your reflection on the conversation so far?
Well, thank you very much, Moderator. First, let me recognize and appreciate the presence of our leaders, His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and His Excellency President Mahamadou Issoufou, the former President of Niger. It is very important that our leaders are here as part of this discussion. One of the challenges that we face is infrastructure deficit. Our senior brother, President of African Development Bank, Adesina, will tell us that it is estimated to be over $100 billion annually. This deficit in infrastructure constrains accelerated trade. Although, of course, giant steps have been taken, the AFD, African Development Bank itself, has invested over the last 5 years between $30 to $40 billion in infrastructure development. Afrexim Bank, since its establishment, has equally invested in trade supporting infrastructure over $20 billion. Even with these concrete interventions that are being made, there is still more that can be done. There's still more that our private equity firms can do, sovereign wealth funds, to invest in trade supporting infrastructure. There are positive and success stories. If you go to Tema here in Ghana and you see the world-class port, if you go to Togo, you will see a world-class port that services not only Togo, but also Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Similarly, in Southern Africa, in Namibia, we see the Walvis Bay port servicing Zambia, southern part of DRC, and so on. So the infrastructure deficit is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for investment. The second, and I will pause here, the second and important point is on the free movement of persons. The protocol on the free movement of persons has been ratified by only 4 or 5 countries. However, we know that countries have taken individual steps to ensure and to facilitate free movement of persons. Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda. These are some of the countries that have unilaterally said that for all Africans, visa on arrival. It is a step, it's an important step, but the African Union has to do more to accelerate the free movement of persons as an enabler for trade. Because a CEO or a small medium enterprise owner that seeks to travel from one part of the continent to the other is not traveling for any other purpose than to do business. And we know from the experience of the European Union the positive impact of free movement of persons on creating economic opportunities, competitiveness of the European economy, and of course boosting intra-Africa trade. I believe that this would be the same for our continent, that we should achieve full-scale free movement of Africans across borders. Yes, there are security questions. Yes, we have to pay attention to those, but I think we need to accelerate the movement of persons to ensure that we are able to meet the target of doubling intra-Africa trade by the year 2035. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Mr. Wamkele Mene, for highlighting the alternative opportunities also on financing, because I heard you talk about sovereign wealth funds and all that, and then also reminding us that the protocol on free movement must be ratified. And Mr. President, I have to update you that in the 2 days discussions we had before, we spoke about the criticality of accelerating the ratifications quickly to reach the requisite 15 so that this protocol enters into force. And I have a feeling your people might have updated you that there was a unanimous push to request you to be the champion of this initiative. But I'll not get ahead of myself. I'll now come back to my panelists. Ogogo Akpata, you're the Managing Director of Templars. Legal issues are critical, institutional issues are critical, policy issues are critical. Yesterday we spoke about the fact that when we talk about the AfCTA, we really can't be talking anymore about ambition. In fact, it's implementation, because the treaty has come into force. It's implementation. What are your reflections on how we accelerate implementation of the legal and institutional arrangements so that the promise of the AfCTA is the treatment African enterprises get when they are in different African countries?
All protocols observed, and good afternoon to everyone. Please, can you repeat the question again?
How do we accelerate the reform agenda of our laws, institutions, to make sure the AfCFTA comes into force effectively?
Okay. You know, we have what we're trying to do. We're trying to do cross-border trade and with a common market. However, outside Africa, they look at Africa as one country, but we know it's not. We have different countries, different cultures, different laws, and different legal systems. Currently, we have non-harmonization of our laws the laws to govern cross-border transactions. We need to harmonize those laws because if you're trading across Africa and your laws are, you don't have laws to trade, then you have a problem. If you see what obtains in the EU, you have the Rome Convention, the Rome Regulation. It's one law. OHADA is one common law. So that's a problem that has to be addressed because yes, we have laws as stated in the African Continental Free Trade, but it's not for contracts between businesses. Another thing that we need to look into is dispute resolution amongst businesses. With regards to the Continental Free Trade Area, it talks about resolution of disputes, but only among member states. It does not talk about disputes amongst businesses. I understand that in the phase 2, there are conversations with regards investors and member states. But we need to, but it's totally silent with regards to businesses. Again, I will take you to other examples like the COMESA. The COMESA, they have dispute resolution clauses among businesses, as well as host member states, as well as investors and member states among themselves. As we know, African countries never go, they're dispute adverse. So and it's businesses, the businesses that are the main thrust of what we're trying to do. So we need to have robust dispute resolution clauses there. But then with regards to, I'll jump to institutional challenges. We don't have robust institutions. We need capacity with these institutions. What we're trying to do out there is create across the continent a single economic zone. But the institutions in Africa, even amongst the countries themselves, is a challenge. More so if you are trying to create one institution for the whole continent. So we need to have that. One of the speakers talked about infrastructure as well. We need to improve on our infrastructure.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those reflections on how to get institutions and the next right. And yesterday we spoke about the need for private sector to be galvanized to advocate, to get their states to initiate proceedings if needed. Uzo, I'm coming to you. You have quite a track record in the area of, innovation, but also promoting Africa to the world. I recall the Africa Charter, the Africa Center in New York that you run. Tell us about inspiring the youth through innovation. How do we go about it practically?
Sure. First of all, again, observing all protocols. Let me, start by saying that it's very interesting to listen to discussions about trade that are so focused. Sometimes I feel like people just bring me here to cause trouble, so let me cause a little trouble. And then they cut my mic. That are so focused only on the economic aspects, when there's a real ideas aspect and a cultural aspect and a thought aspect to the movement to trade itself, right, to the movement of goods and services, to creativity. And that's where I think the younger population comes in, right? It's that freshness of ideas, that movement of ideas, which, as His Excellency the Secretary General is saying, moves along with people, that becomes really, really important. And we're not supporting that infrastructure right now at all. I think it's crucial for us to take a step back and think about how we are developing the next generation to put together that new set of ideas, and how we're actually supporting and funding, those people who are going to create the goods, create the services that we're actually going to move across the continent. Now, practically speaking, how do you do that? There's an investment in education that is needed, and I think that was said. I think we have to redouble our efforts. We have to think about education not in building for today, but actually building for the continents we want to see, right? And I think that's something that often gets lost in some of these discussions. We're too focused on playing catch up and creating these frameworks, and not actually creating frameworks for the world that's to come. What's that world going to look like? It's one in which the way that we operate, whether it's trade-wise, whether it's economic-wise, whether it's health-wise, all of these things are going to be drastically changed by the changing environmental context that we see, that we're already seeing. That's something that we need to think about and invest in. It's going to be changed drastically. I think the CEO of MTN mentioned things like ChatGPT-3. That kind of investment is going to be changed dramatically by things like that. Are we thinking about that, and are you gearing your youth up for that? It's going to be changed by a rapidly changing geopolitical system. China and the United States at loggerheads as opposed to cooperating with each other. Are we preparing our young folks for that kind of situation? What are the structures that we need to put in place? And so what we think about a lot is, what does the new African era look like? What does that next generation of investment need to be? Where are the ideas going to come from? And how can all of you, right, in your various capacities, support a younger population in actually bringing that about, as opposed to bringing about sort of the catch-up that we're doing right now?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Uzo. Education, innovation, financing the right things. I'm coming to our final panelist now, Crystal Jackson, Chair, Africa America Institute. Diaspora is a critical part of the success of the AfCFTA. How do you see diaspora facilitating foreign direct investment and direct diaspora investment?
Okay. To the established protocol, I've been listening and thinking about the work of AAI, and there's an opportunity that I think we should consider. It is an opportunity to connect Africa to the highest earning population in the world, and that's the U.S., and in particular, it's African Americans. I think about my own family and our journey. My family 200 years ago, over 200 years ago, managed to buy land that we still maintain and actually live on. My family understands the importance and significance of creating and sustaining an economy. There are so many families like my family that if the opportunity presented itself in a way that's easy and accessible, would do the same thing here on the continent of Africa. In the U.S. right now, there is a big push to increase the number of black venture capitalists and black fund managers. And why is that so important? It's important because when we have control and make decisions about the dollars, we know where to deploy them. We deploy them to people that look just like us. A couple of weeks ago, we had the privilege of visiting with the president, and we were joined by the first African-American early-stage investor in Silicon Valley, an African-American by the name of Eric Moore. And if you think about what Eric started in Silicon Valley and the global impact that it is having now and is reaching the continent, so I think connecting Africans and African Americans is one of the most sustainable pathways for direct investment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Crystal. I think you've given us great ideas about how to really collaborate better with the diaspora in this AfCFTA context. We have 5 minutes to the close of this panel, but I do think a lot of richness has come out of the discussion, especially on the solutions agenda. And you know, what I take away from this, and we will find the details, of course, when the outcome is also presented, as well as the compact, it validates what we've been discussing over the last 2 days. And I guess the point to wrap it up is really to look at the trade and agenda. Trade and industry, trade and infrastructure, trade and investment, trade and movement of people, trade and security, trade and legal reform, trade and innovation, trade and partners from the diaspora. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, panelists. We've come to the end.
So we are still live here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogue here at the Pediasi Lodge. And just ended was a panel discussion on putting business at the heart of hearts of the implementation of the AfFCTA, addressing blockages and incentivizing action. The lead business contributors were Ronnie Ntuli, chairman of Tiolo DB, and Dr. Sir David Ajayi, founder and principal, Ajayi Associates, who spoke on addressing infrastructure, food and energy deficits. Also on the panel was Dr. Humphrey Yim Dake, president of the Ghana Association of Industries, AGI, who also spoke on facilitating free movement of people across borders. Then we had Dr. Catherine Chinedum Aniagulu Okoye, the regional director for West Africa Ford Foundation, speaking on guaranteeing security to deepen infrastructure, to deepen intra-African trade. Also, we had another forum. Also, there was putting business at the heart of the implementation of AfFCTA, addressing blockages and incentivizing action. On the panel where Ogogo Akpata, the managing partner, Templars, who spoke on addressing legal, institutional, and policy constraints. Also, Dr. Uzodimma Iriala spoke on inspiring the youth through innovation. And then finally was Crystal Jackson, Chair, Africa America Institute, who spoke on facilitating FDI and direct diaspora investment. Still on the program lineup, we expect to hear reflections by His Excellency Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, Vice President of the Republic of Ghana. I must also mention that the President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, is in the premises seated right in front with the dignitaries. We also have expecting also to have some more moderation and discussions on making it happen. The time is now or never, moving from ambition to action. And further also, we will have a presentation of the Action Compact from His Excellency Issoufou Mahamadou, former president of Niger, and a keynote remarks from Alhaji Aliko Dangote, the GCON CEO of Dangote Group of Companies. If you know Aliko Dangote, he is the richest man in Africa and is working towards achieving the $30 billion mark as the first African to do so. Later, we'll have the closing remark from the President, His Excellency Dr. President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. We'll cross over now and continue to listen to our next speaker who has mounted the podium.
The AfCTA Secretariat, honorable ministers, ambassadors and high commissioners present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to present to you the outcome of the dialogue these past 2 days. I'll just do it as highlights because it is a long document, so we will just go through the highlights. African countries should undertake initiatives supporting their private sector to take advantage of the preferential treatment provided by the AfCFTA. The second one, African governments should consider the African private sector as a partner of choice in the implementation of the AfCFTA and should improve the business, trading, and climate environment. Governments should expedite the creation of an enabling environment for intra-African trade and investment, both at the national and continental levels. The private sector should utilize the operational tools that are developed under the AfCFTA Secretariat, such as the AfCFTA e-tariff book and the Rules of Origin Manual, and also the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, that's the PAPS, to facilitate cross-border payments in local African currencies. Also, the dialogue commended Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, and the United Republic of Tanzania, who represent the 5 regions of Africa, for the Guided Trade Initiative. And they encouraged other countries to actually join the initiative. The meeting also called on the AfCFTA Secretariat to expand the Guided Trade Initiative to include trading services. African governments should also pursue commodity-based industrialization by encouraging the private sector to add value to African commodities and facilitate the production of high-level goods and services within the African single market. We also called on governments to enhance multimodal transport and logistics, and that includes air transport services as an enabler for both trade in goods and services, and called on governments to accelerate the implementation of the single African air transport market in collaboration with the African Civil Aviation Commission, African Airlines, and other relevant stakeholders in order to harness the full potential of the AfCFTA agreement. African countries should invest in infrastructure and energy with the support of financial institutions, the private sector, development partners, in order to improve trade facilitation, reduce production, transport, trade, and transaction costs, and boost the competitiveness of African economies. Governments, in partnership with the private sector, should facilitate better access to technology that powers made in Africa production and made for Africa in Africa. In this regard, governments must create an enabling environment for innovations that support Africa's value addition within the framework of the AfCFTA. Governments should establish community-level incubation centers, adopt an entrepreneurial approach to education, and mainstream science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, including innovation in the curriculum. Multilateral development banks, commercial banks, investors, development partners, and other financiers should make available attractive, affordable trade finance to support private sector engagement within the AfCFTA market. There is also need for member states to mobilize domestic resources to support their own development agenda, including the productive sector, And to this end, there was a call to make member states to broaden and diversify financial products through innovative financial mechanisms such as the foreign wealth funds. There was also a call on African governments to set up special measures to support women entrepreneurs to take advantage of the AfCFTA. And to this end, there is an initiative called AfCFTA, which represents a core movement to advance women's effective participation in the AfCFTA. Governments are also called to offer special incentives to attract young people, including youth-owned enterprises, in the implementation of the AfCFTA. African governments should also nurture the African micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to enhance their capabilities through better access to skilled labor, financial incentives, strengthening of innovation capabilities, and to accelerate industrialization and trade on the continent. And also that African governments should ratify the AU Protocol on Free Trade of Movement, and in this regard, governments, the private sector, the AfCFTA Secretariat should advocate for early entry into force of this protocol. There is therefore a need to have a head of state who will champion the protocol, and there was a call, as mentioned by Dr. Joy, that the President of Ghana would humbly be requested to be that champion. And finally, that African governments and the private sector should commit to partner together to move the AfCFTA from ambitions to action. And so mine is just to say thank you and to give our gratitude to His Excellency, the President of Ghana, and the people of Ghana for hosting the inaugural meeting of the African Prosperity Dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily, for that extraordinary presentation of the outcome document. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will ask your indulgence for the next 10, 12, maximum 15 minutes to round up the conversation around making it happen. The time is now or never. Moving from ambition to action. And I would like to call back onto the stage Mr. Ralph Tendai Mupita, Mr. Ralph Mupita, who's the MTN Group President and CEO. I would like to bring back to the stage the Chief Executive Officer of the Ethiopian Airlines, Mesfin Tasu. And last but definitely not the least, I would like to bring back the Chair, Africa America Institute, Crystal Jackson, to wrap up the conversation on their thoughts of how we are moving from ambition to action. And also, if I may bring to the stage the Deputy Trade Minister of South Africa, Deputy Fakile Majola, to join us as well. Okay. Thank you very much for joining this panel. So we placed this conversation at the end because even though our wonderful Emily has given us the outcome document, it is imperative that we move and we use the words to move from ambition to action, which is most likely one of the most complicated things to do. So in no particular order, I think I'm going to start off with you, Ralph, because you're right next to me. Kate did mention something pivotal. We have a lot of conversations, we have a lot of dialogues. What do you see being the one major hindrance to our moving from action to ambition in a speedy manner, and how should we deal with that hindrance?
Thank you very much, and all protocol observed. You asked for 1 point, and maybe if you can give me the luxury of 2. I think the first one is to take a nationalistic view as opposed to a Pan-African view. There are always going to be challenges in each and every country, and at any particular point in time, there will be differences. But if we do take a nationalistic as opposed to a Pan-African view to some of these issues, we won't move forward. I would put that as the first point. The second point is the point I made in my remarks earlier on, is that we need to build a higher level of trust between business, government, and broader civil society, that we need to move in the same direction. There has been historically incidents that have created this mistrust, but we need to move beyond them. But obviously trust is built through action and evidence, and from the private sector, I would argue that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And those two things, the much more Pan-African view, building trust, enables us to move from ambition to action much more quickly.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Ms. View, whether we like it or not, I use Ethiopian Airlines as a clear symbol of what commercializing a nationality looks like. Now, the argument always is that if we want to be able to trade across our countries, then, for example, moving from Accra to, I don't know, Kigali should be facilitated, should be easier. What do you need from that airline perspective to facilitate the movement from one country to the other? And essentially, what must we also as consumers understand about difficulties that you may have? I think it's on.
Okay. Excellencies, all protocols observed again. Yeah, I was focusing on the airline industry in my presentation. And Ethiopian Airlines has been serving the African continent by expanding its network with daily and multiple frequencies to several of the cities, carrying both passengers and cargo. Through this action, we have been promoting trade, tourism, and investment in Africa. And we will continue doing the same by partnering with other airlines in other countries. We believe that African Airlines has to cooperate. We have to work in support of the African free trade area initiatives. And we are committed with a Pan-African vision to realize this. But we truly need the support of African governments to fully understand the strategic nature of airlines. If you are a billionaire and if you want to become a millionaire, you invest in airlines. The airline business doesn't generate profit to its owners. Instead, it is an engine of development. It is a catalyst for economic development of countries and the continent. Governments need to understand this, that it is a strategic business unit. It's not like a small business that creates profit. So it needs to be supported, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of liberalization of the market, in terms of making the tax very reasonable. The airline industry has to pay tax, no doubt. But let us make it reasonable so that it serves the very basic purpose of developing the continent. That is what we are asking. Thank you.
Crystal, one of the things that I do know that sits at the core of his heart, when I say his heart, I mean His Excellency the President of the Republic of Ghana. One of the things that sits at the core of his being is the return of our brothers and sisters from the diaspora. So clearly at the top of our agenda is the diaspora socioeconomic inclusion. But at this point of Africa fast-tracking its ambition to action, at this point of us wanting to support ourselves country to country, at this point of us wanting to give the AfCFTA all the necessary support it needs. What role does the diaspora play in this? Let's talk about opportunities. Let's talk about investment. Let's talk about nation building, so to speak. What do you see as the role of the diaspora in this action? I think you just have to turn on the button and it works. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. It's central to it, to achieving the mission. I think there are two things. First, I want to talk about the work AAI is currently doing in Detroit with school children, helping them see themselves outside of the story of Africa, but not through the lens of European domination. So I think it's very important that we retell the story, the correct story, the full story. So I think that's one. I think there's a great opportunity when we connect the diaspora for us to understand the power that we have to transform the economy away from that lens. And I think it's, again, like I said earlier, I think it's through direct investment. I think it's breaking down barriers to access. So once we have more access to each other, then I think we can do more to sort of accelerate what we know can and should be possible for the continent.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister Fakile, I'm going to put you on the spot and talk about policy. Talk about the kind of policies that would be required to fast track the actions or the achievements of the AfCFTA, because as far as we're concerned, it is going to be one of the biggest advantages to the continent of Africa. So from country to country, what are the unified policies that are required to provide assistance to the AfCFTA to achieve its mandate in a short possible time?
In a short possible time is the key word. I'm not allowed to say all protocol observed. I'm a government official, so I've got to acknowledge the presence of our president of Ghana, President Akufo-Addo, the former president of Niger, and our outstanding champion of the AfCFTA, the former Prime Minister of Guinea, our Secretary General, ministers. Ladies and gentlemen, so let me come to your question about policy. Firstly, Honorable President, I've been sitting in the session since yesterday. I must say that I'm very excited about what has come out of this. The choice of theme is very important. That's why you underline the term, in the shortest time possible, from ambition to action. So when my sister left the floor, there was applause there because she underlined something. Can Africa stop talking? We know what needs to be done. Can we get down to the business of getting things done? So I would like to appeal most importantly to our leaders across the continent, our presidents, to take us on in this journey. We have identified key issues on infrastructure, on technology, on skills, and my sister spoke very important about issues of security that we've got to tackle across the continent. This instrument, there's nothing in my time that I have come to understand as most important instrument that will give birth to the vision that our forebears have had of the unification and integration of the African continent. I think it is the best instrument that we have, so we've got to ensure that we can move with speed with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and can attend to all the issues that the panelists here put up on infrastructure, water infrastructure, rail infrastructure, roads infrastructure, technology and innovation, and the rest of the things. They have been identified. Our leaders must now guide us, including us, whipping us into line as ministers to ensure that we can get down to the business of doing things. So we all agree here. Dr. Adesina inspires me with this. Says we have a very low ambition as Africans, that we say we want to feed Africa. He says, in fact, our ambition must be to feed the world because we have the capacity to. Can we get down to the business of getting things done? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. So I suppose what you're saying is the next time we meet, it should be Africa Prosperity Action and not Africa Prosperity Dialogues, because we're going to move from talking to the actual to the action, and I do agree with that. I promised the audience 15 minutes. I have approximately 2 minutes to go. So I'm going to give each one of you perhaps one major call to action. Not
take Africa not just to catch up, but to actually catapult above the rest of the world.
I'm going to ask each of you to also use this opportunity to create your own call to action. Honorable Fakile, we'll start off with you. We'll continue with you.
3 issues. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure for the African continent.
Thank you very much. Crystal.
Return home. If you're African American, Africa is your home. Return home.
And last, definitely not the least, Mesfin.
Can you come again with the question?
So your call to action, as we take the learnings of the last 2 days plus today, as we go out into our various fields of endeavor, as we represent Africa, what would be your call to action to Africa, Africans around the world on exactly how they can each contribute to move Africa from ambition to action, and of course to give the AfCFTA all the necessary support?
As I said earlier, all we need is support from the governments. The governments need to understand what air transport industry is, and that is all. But when it comes to Ethiopian Airlines, we fully support the initiative of the African Free Trade Area initiatives. And we are growing. We would like to continue supporting the free movement of people and goods to bring or to make our own contribution to African prosperity.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a time that I requested from you, and I want to say please do give a round of applause to the MTN Group President and CEO, Mr. Ralph Mupita. We also have the Chief Executive Officer of Ethiopian Airlines, of course, Mesfin Tasu. We have the Chair, Africa America Institute, Crystal Jackson, and definitely last but not the least, we've got the Honorable Deputy Minister of Trade from South Africa, the Honorable Fakile. Thank you so much for being my audience and for wrapping this up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll now hand over to my colleague, Prince, to take it over from here.
Thank you very much, Anita. I would like to recognize again His Excellency Selou Diallo, former Prime Minister of Guinea. He is not the representative of Guinea. Thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize our major sponsor for today, and that is the Bank of Ghana. In a short while, we will be going out for lunch. Lunch will be hosted by the President, and it will be a 1-hour affair. Ushers will guide delegates to the hall designated for lunch. Official dinner will be at 7 p.m. tonight. Please make sure you talk to the ushers as to where that will be. Thank you. Also, we have a business lounge for networking, and you will be astounded as to the number of people, the number of businesses we have over there ready to talk to you and connect with you. Please make your way to the business lounge after this. Anita. We are trying to move things around to make lunch earlier for you because we have dinner as well.
So we are still live here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogue happening at the Peduase Lodge under the auspices of the Presidency of the Republic of Ghana and the AfCTA Secretariat and pioneered by the Africa Prosperity Network. This is the maiden edition of this 3-day event which is happening here at the Peduase Lodge under the theme From Ambition to Action, Delivering Prosperity Through Continental Trade. And so far there have been very insightful conversations on various topics, all garnered towards pushing the agenda of ambition to action, moving the conversation beyond mere rhetoric and talk to actual action, and getting Africa to be prosperous and on the basis of the African continental free trade area. We've had key speakers, various panel sessions going on here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogues. Our President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo later will be hosting lunch with all the delegates here after the very insightful conversations that have gone on. We are expecting later in the program to have a keynote address from Aliko Dangote, who is the Group CEO of Dangote Group of Companies, and also the closing remarks from the President, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. We've had speeches from Minister of Trade and Industry, also from the Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta, and also from the Africa Guarantee Fund CEO Jules Ngam-Kama, and also from CEO of Telka Cocoa Kate Focho. And also we've had great conversations from top business leaders in the sub-region, from the CEO of the Ethiopian Airlines, who was the first to speak, to give his address. That's Mesfin Tassil, the Group CEO of Ethiopian Airlines. We also had the CEO of MTN Group also speaking. We have on the stage now the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the Trade Minister, Samuel Bujinapo, and the Secretary General, Wamkele Mene, as well as the one of the major players in the AfFCTA conversation, Honorable East Fernandez Mamfondi, who's the chair of AfFCTA, exchanging pleasantries on the stage there, and the President just took delivery of the outcome document, business and policy, from all the conversations that have gone on so far. As you can see, the President in your shot, busy glancing through, and now we have Honorable Eves Fernandez addressing the crowd. We'll cross over now and listen to what he has to say.
Champion of AfCFTA, Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, and dear colleagues, Excellency Secretary General of AfCFTA, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps accredited to the Republic of Ghana, Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, all protocols observed. I have the singular honor to present to you the Dialogue Compact for Africa's Prosperity. We, business leaders, African business leaders, political leaders, government ministers, and high officials of the AfCFTA Secretariat, technocrats, women and young entrepreneurs met during the Presidential Dialogue for Entrepreneurs, which held here at Peduase Lodge here in Ghana on the 28th of January 2023. This dialogue was organized under the auspices of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana on the team AfFCTA, from ambition to action, promoting prosperity through continental trade. Following deliberations on relevant issues, we commit to the following. From the business community, to promote and use the presidential regime in all the instruments, to also enhance the instruments in science, in technology and innovation in order to promote production and industrialization of value-added African products, to advocate for ratification and update of the African Union Protocol on free movement of persons, right of residence and establishment, to work in close collaboration with the government in the implementation of the agreement establishing the AfFCTA, to governments, from governments to put in place an enabling environment for investment in order to support the use of preferential treatment in AfFCTA, to continue with industrialization on basic products and facilitate production of goods and services of high quality within the single African market, to invest in infrastructure for multimodal transport and logistics, including transport services, air transport services, energy, communication, with the support of financial institutions and the private sector, in order to improve on trade facilitation and reduce production cost, transport, trade and transactions, to establish incubation centers at a community level and adopt an entrepreneurial approach in education, in particular in teaching and vocational and professional training, as well as science, innovation and technology, to mobilize national resources, and this in particular through sovereign funds, through pension funds, through insurance funds, through capital investment funds, through investment of the diaspora and investment, green investment, as well as transfers, to put in place special measures for women entrepreneurs to be able to take full advantage of the AfFCTA, in particular for a rapid entry into force. On the part of the AfFCTA Secretariat, support state parties in the implementation of the agreement establishing the AfFCTA through trade facilitation, through collaboration with economic, regional economic communities, advocacy and capacity building, to commit with partners to mobilize adequate resources for the implementation of AfFCTA and facilitate implementation, the establishment of AfFCTA institutions, in particular an office for intellectual property rights, for investment and trade, and a competition authority, as well as an African unified competition regime, to support conclusion of the protocol on digital trade and youth and women before July 2023, as set by the heads of state and government in the African Union, to facilitate work for the consolidation of a common market, African market, on the basis of after a protocol on trade in services, in goods, investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade, youth and women in trade. To the partners, the multilateral banks, commercial banks, investors and other partners, financial partners, they shall work with governments as well as the private sector to make available attractive commercial supplies in order to support the commitment of the private sector within the AfFCTA market. from the development partners, ECA and the UNDP, shall continue to provide a coordinated support to government and to businesses in order to ensure full implementation of the AfFCTA. We commit to, within the framework of dialogue, to bring together people on Africa's prosperity and review the situation regarding progress made. We wish to thank His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo and the government of Ghana for having led the process in the dialogue on Africa's process, and we wish to solemnly ask of His Excellency to be the champion for the ratification of the African Union Protocol on free movement of persons. I wish to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. For our follow-up, we will now invite...
So that was Honorable Yves Ferdinand Mfondi, the chair of the AfFCTA, presenting, giving his final remarks after the presentation of the outcome of the document on business and policy leader dialogue to the presidency, who was flanked by the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, Wankele Mene, and the Minister of Trade, Samuel Abu Jinapo. After all the dialogue that had gone on in this conversation, joining them also is His Excellency Issoufou Mahamadou, who is the former president of Niger, and the AfFCTA champion in this group photograph. So in order of appearance, to your right is the Secretary General, Wankele Mene, for the AfFCTA, followed by His Excellency Issoufou Mahamadou, former president of Niger, and we have our president, Akufo-Addo. We're still here live at the Africa Prosperity Dialogue at Pedrase, where great conversations have been going on pushing the agenda of ambition to action on the AfFCTA and delivering prosperity through continental trade. And all the conversations that have been going on so far have been geared towards this theme, and we've had great speeches from various industry players and key business leaders on the continent, speaking about their various sectors, from infrastructure to telecom, transport, and the likes, all in a bid to get all hands on deck in the conversation of ambition to action. We have just been informed that Mr. Aliko Dangote would not be delivering his speech in person today at the program. He is the keynote. He was to deliver the keynote address, but someone has been sent in his place to do that presentation here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogues. And okay, he has mounted the stage. We will now cross over now and listen to the keynote address being delivered on behalf of Alhaji Aliko Dangote, the group CEO of Dangote Group. Stay with us.
Otumba Ni Adebayo, who is here with us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have already communicated the apologies of Alhaji Aliko Dangote, the president of the Dangote Group, to His Excellency and indeed to the organizers of this conference. It is indeed something that happened only last night, and he could never make it. Your Excellency, let me start by first of all commending His Excellency Mr. Wankele Mene for the tremendous amount of work that has been done to bring us to this point on the AfFCTA. I think we're all aware that some other regions took decades to get to this point. Mr. Wankele, we appreciate and we thank you for your effort. Let me also appreciate and thank all the contributors, and particularly our heads of states and governments for giving the necessary support and encouragement for the establishment of the AfFCTA. And I think what has been done just now, where we have identified the actions that are absolutely necessary for the AfFCTA to be implemented, we now can say to Mr. Wankele that the ball is in your court and that of your associates and principals. However, as a practitioner in business in this continent, the Dangote Group currently has footprints in 12 countries, and we are building more. We have indeed invested and established plants in about 10 of these countries, excluding our own country, Nigeria. And we have exported our products meant across various borders in West Africa, in East Africa, in Southern Africa, and in Central Africa. But we have also looked at other sectors apart from cement. Indeed, as we speak, Your Excellency may be aware that a team of the Dangote experts are here in Ghana looking at opportunities to invest in a new area, not necessarily in cement, because we are already in cement here. We are looking into agriculture. Your Excellency, from our experience, what 3 key things the private sector would need to see being done and being put in place and being focused on to ensure that the tremendous amount of effort and work that has been done by Mr. Wankele and many of the people who have supported him to get us to this point, I think it is important to identify the 3 things now. First, compliance. Mr. Wankele, all these protocols and regulations and rules that you have put in place, that the AfFCTA put in place, will not be of much help unless our countries are committed to comply with the agreements that we have reached and with the regulations that they themselves have implemented in their countries. Our experience over many years is, in fact, that part of a problem is compliance. Yes, the private sector will understand we have weak infrastructure, will understand we have problems with logistics problems, we have problems with energy and so on, but they will plan to do their business as they can, as much as they can, on the basis of existing regulation and rules and guidelines and protocols. But on the assumption that those protocols and guidelines and regulations will be complied with on a level playing field. We have had experience, Your Excellencies, that even with regards to protocols that have been agreed for decades, the ETLS, for instance, we have countries that are not complying with these guidelines and this regulation and these protocols, and therefore impeding the process of business and trade. I think it is important that we highlight the need for compliance. And this is the responsibility, Your Excellencies, of you and your colleagues, our heads of states. The second, Your Excellency, is the private sector itself. Yes, we have talked about what the public sector should do. We have talked about what institutions should do. But what about the private sector? Because at the end of the day, trade takes place between individuals and individual organizations. Therefore, we need to ensure that we bring together the key operators, whether at the small scale or large scale, to come together to build the necessary confidence and trust that enables them to work together, to invest together, to create those joint ventures and those various links in our value chains that will make AfFCTA work. So we call on the private sector to do that. And we call on the public sector and indeed on AfFCTA Secretariat to also support and promote this bringing together of the private sector through the establishment and encouragement of those platforms, like indeed the African Business Council, like the African Manufacturer Association, and indeed other key institutions of the private sector that need to come together to build trust, to build confidence, and to be able to build joint investments. Lastly, Your Excellency, we also need to improve from governance and the capacity of governance. I believe that it is absolutely important, particularly that our regulators recognize and recognize their responsibility, not just to serve as regulating and stopping, but also to serve as facilitators and promoters of investment, of trade, and so on. I think to do that, we need to significantly improve and extend the capacity of our regulators and indeed our government operators. Thank you, Excellency.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the climax of the last 3 days, today being the third day, and I would like to humbly ask that you give yourself...
So you just heard Engineer Ahmed Mansour, who is the Executive Director of Dangote Industries, speaking on behalf of the Group CEO of the CEO of Dangote Group of Companies, that is Aliko Dangote, the richest man on the continent, who was our keynote speaker for today. But he unfortunately wasn't able to make it in person, so he sent his executive director for Dangote Industries, who also doubles as the CEO for Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission of Nigeria, Engineer Ahmed Mansour. Now to the President of the Republic of Ghana, who is now approaching the podium to deliver his remarks on the event so far. The President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, ladies and gentlemen. He is approaching the podium, finally has arrived, and will be delivering the closing remarks for this 3-day event happening here at Peduase, the Africa Prosperity Dialogues, on the theme, After, From Ambition to Action, Delivering Prosperity Through Continental Trade, that has brought together industry players, business leaders, and leaders of various governments on the continent. We cross over now and listen to the President.
Niger, Secretary General of the AfFCTA, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government and people of Ghana, I congratulate the Africa Prosperity Network, the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the United Nations Development Program, the team at the Office of the President, and all other partners and sponsors for what I can safely describe as the success of this historic dialogue, and that of the Associated Business and Policy Leaders Dialogue. I thank my fellow presidents a great deal for sending their representatives to grace this meeting with their attendance. It is yet again another demonstration of their commitment towards the success of the AfCFTA. My sincere gratitude also goes to the lead presenters and contributors, the panelists, and thought leaders for a great job done. And I want to thank all of you, each single one of you, for coming to Ghana for this colloquium. The last 3 days have seen some of the best of African minds and expertise at work, and reiterated our collective desire to transform the African continent. The insightful discourse, filled with great passion and fueled by the wealth of cutting-edge knowledge and business experience, has ensured that we have a practical and pragmatic compact and action plan to drive accelerated implementation of the AfCFTA. We need quick wins, and this is exactly what the outcome of this dialogue offers us, as well as a concentrated focus on the steps towards prosperity for the African peoples. Excellencies, it is encouraging to note that as of November 20, 2022, 44 AU member states have ratified the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is strong evidence of the growing political will and commitment of the leadership on the continent to achieve market integration in Africa. And it is our duty to engage to ensure the full participation of all member states. The effects of the global pandemic and the ongoing geopolitical conflict in Russia and Ukraine on Africa have been significant. From rising food and energy costs to loss of domestic revenues and unsustainable debt levels. In fact, we are one shock away from a very dire situation. Consequently, we in Africa must, with a sense of urgency, work together to guarantee the economic security and secure the prosperity of our peoples. To accomplish this shared objective, African political and business leaders, as well as other strategic stakeholders, should use actively the opportunities presented by the AfCFTA agreement to boost intra-African trade in food, industrial products, and services in order to enhance productive capacity and strengthen its resilience to external shocks. The AfCFTA will eliminate tariffs on 97% of goods traded within the African continent, offering significant opportunity for businesses to set up and expand in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, while we recognize the enormous challenges we may face, it is the smart actions that we take, the investments that we make in our peoples, and the speed and effectiveness in implementing the common African market that will guarantee that the 1.3 billion people who call this continent home can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives. We're already seeing some important progress. For example, a number of financial institutions have signed on to the Pan-African Payment Settlement System, a digital platform to facilitate trade. It is a significant step towards the creation of the single currency, which will be a major facilitator of the effectiveness of the single market. We have achieved some 90% convergence on the rules of origin, with the exception of a few commodities. And the $9 billion United States dollars worth of investments have been secured by the AfCFTA Secretariat. But there is a great deal to be done to realize the full benefits of inter-Africa trade. And I believe there is certainly here at this dialogue broad agreement on four fundamental elements for our progress. Firstly, the need to invest in our productive capacity and critical infrastructure. We should continue to embark on policies that deepen industrialization, digital transformation, skills upgrading, and infrastructure development by accelerating the implementation of continental programs such as the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, the Comprehensive Africa Infrastructure Development Program, the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa, and the Action Plan for the Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa. Secondly, we have to continue to improve the business and investment climate and strengthen business and investment promotion organizations with a view to creating an enabling environment for the private sector to contribute to the development of inclusive and sustainable growth in Africa through industrialization, through trade, and the creation of widespread employment opportunities. Additionally, our governments and respective private sectors should work to provide opportunities for the development of women and young entrepreneurs with a view to achieving gender equality, empowering women and girls, as well as engaging youth in the productive sectors of the economy. For the private sector, especially micro, small, and medium enterprises, the time has come to take advantage of the largest single market on the planet to increase value addition, promote economies of scale, and expand your businesses. Thirdly, we should scale up efforts to mobilize domestic resources to support our development agenda, including the productive sector. We need to broaden and diversify financial products through innovative financial mechanisms such as sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, insurance savings, private equity funds, diaspora and sovereign bonds, impact investing, green bonds, remittances, public-private partnerships. And we need to pay serious attention to and arrest illicit financial outflows out of the continent, which are estimated at about some 88 billion United States dollars annually, depriving Africa of significant resources that could be used to support a development agenda. We must urgently and collectively institute comprehensive and unambiguous tax policies to combat tax-motivated illicit financial flows, strengthen legal and law enforcement systems, and bring together national agencies to stem such flows. We need concrete measures to stop the systemic impoverishment of our continent and the theft of its resources. Finally, investment in technology and innovation. Technology and innovation are transforming industries in every sector of the global economy. The ability of African countries to harness and apply technology, i.e. the process of innovation, particularly through new and emerging technologies such as nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, artificial intelligence, and robotics, to transform structurally our economies and educational systems is critical to realizing these potential economic benefits. However, accessibility, affordability, and inadequate regulation and governance frameworks are still impeding the development of emerging technology across the continent. It is thus imperative to build technology and trade policy convergences whilst introducing and adopting new approaches to designing converging technology and trade policy regimes. In conclusion, I would like to urge all of us here to see ourselves as champions of intra-African trade. We in Africa have demonstrated great ambition in setting up the world's largest free trade area since the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1994. And I believe that the generation of African leaders, led by the distinguished former president of the Republic of Niger, the outstanding AfCFTA champion, His Excellency Mahamadou Issoufou, who have managed to bring the AfCFTA into being, will occupy as privileged a place in the history of our continent as the generation of pioneer leaders who established the Organization of African Unity, which is now being transformed into the African Union. We must now, with great zeal and fortitude, back this great ambition with our collective action to harness fully the benefits of a liberalized single market for goods and services. This must be our solemn and moral obligation to our continent, to our children, and to future generations. We cannot afford to fail. As African nations, we must join hands with each other and work diligently to pursue this noble cause. Hopefully, this dialogue, which has brought so many critical minds together, will not be a one-day wonder, but become a permanent feature of our collective calendars. Excuse me. And with the approval of the OU, I need the approval of the AU before I can become the champion of anything. I will readily accept in all humility my proposed role as the champion on the ratification of the Protocol on Free Movement. May God bless us all and Mother Africa. I thank you for your attention.
So you heard the President Akufo-Addo delivering the closing remarks on the Africa Prosperity Dialogues happening here at the Peduase Lodge, bringing an end to the 3-day event on the theme From Ambition to Action. From ambition to action, delivering prosperity through continental trade. And that, there you heard the President reassuring his commitment to this agenda and to this strive of ensuring that Africa prospers under the AfFCTA, and moving the conversation beyond mere ambition to actual action that sees us as a continent take our rightful seat where we belong in terms of prosperity. We have been bringing you live coverage of the Africa Prosperity Dialogue under the auspices of the President, under the auspices of the Presidency of the Republic of Ghana, the AfFCTA Secretariat, and pioneered by the Africa Prosperity Network. This has been a 3-day event, began on the 26th and finally ended today, the 28th of January 2023, here at the Peduase Lodge. After this event, there will be a dinner session and an awards night later in the evening. My name is Michael Obodu. Thank you for keeping your dial locked here on City TV. Please stay tuned.
We've been working the last 3 days. At dinner, we encourage